Good evening, everybody. Brian Neubert here from goldandblack.com, live in Piscataway, New Jersey. You can see Yankee Stadium from here if you look close enough. This is your wrap video following Purdue's 81-76. I think I don't know box score. What's the score? 81-76. Let's just go with it. Loss at Rutgers. Obviously, I'm not at Rutgers. Denying me my annual trip back to my natural habitat. But obviously, watch the game on TV, cover the press conference. Here I am. I'll now videotape myself sharing thoughts on that game. Want to mention our sponsor, the Purdue Union Club Hotel, newly renovated. Keep it in mind. Excuse me. Keep it in mind next time you're planning a trip to campus for your accommodations, because I know how you like accommodations. Moving on, Purdue loses 81-76 to Rutgers. Big takeaway for me here is that people were talking about before the game how big of a deal Ron Harper Jr. being out for Rutgers is, and it was no small deal. He's playing like an All-American this year. He's averaging 24 a game, 7 rebounds. Just he's become a great player for Rutgers. That was a big deal. Looked like a huge break for Purdue. But what is always the case is that no matter who your opponent doesn't have, if you don't play the way you need to play, if you don't do the right things to win, it doesn't really matter who the opponent doesn't have. Purdue knows this better than anybody this year, because Miami loses their best player and their only player who can score, by the way, before the Purdue game. And Purdue loses that game too, because it loses its mind. That's their term, not mine. After halftime at Miami, a game Purdue was dominating at one point. And now tonight, Rutgers doesn't have Ron Harper Jr., but you know what? They still have a good team, because that junior class, in conjunction with Geo Baker, that is their baby boilers. For those of you who fondly remember the Etuan Moore, Robbie Hummel, Juwan Johnson days when they joined Chris Kramer and Keaton Grant, that's what Rutgers has right now. That junior class of Miles Johnson, Ron Harper Jr., Montez Mathis, and who am I forgetting? I'm forgetting another one in there somewhere. That, in conjunction with Geo Baker, who's a year ahead of those guys, that is their baby boilers core. So that's what you were dealing with here. A team that's really good still and has a ton of experience, a ton of toughness, always plays well at home, even if there's nobody there. That's what you're still dealing with, even without Ron Harper. Jacob Young's a hell of a player too. He didn't come in with those guys, but I should mention him too. So that's what you're dealing with here. Even without Ron Harper, you still got to worry about Geo Baker. You still got to worry about Montez Mathis, who's also been a very, very acute pain in Purdue's ass over the years, as has Geo Baker. You still got to worry about those guys. So you still have to prepare for a good team. It might not be the great team that they might be with Ron Harper. I don't know if I'd call Rutgers great quite yet. I think they're really good, but they might not be the same team without Ron Harper, but they still cause a lot of problems. And Purdue knows that better than anybody with Geo Baker. But when you don't, do what you need to do defensively and whatnot, any good team is still going to take advantage of that. And Montez Mathis, you can live with him getting 5 threes off. Because he comes in shooting 29%. That's always the dicey part of playing the percentages, is that there are outliers to every percentage. And I think just Purdue's not good enough defensively to keep people out of what they want to do, to the point where you can't knock them out of rhythm early, because you're just not consistent enough. You're just not effective enough defensively. That's Purdue's problem. Is that Rutgers got too many wide open looks from 3. Rutgers, again, got too much off the dribble. Purdue is not a very good defensive team at this point, nor do I know if they will be at any point in time this year. That is not what Matt Painter will tell them. He will always expect his team to be very good defensively. How realistic that is this year, I don't know. A lot goes into this. Purdue has a number of average defenders in their older ranks. Some guys with some physical limitations. Some guys who haven't necessarily grasped detail-orientedness on defense to this point in their careers. On top of that, you have 6 guys who hadn't played, or 5 guys, however many it is, 5 guys who hadn't played a college basketball game as of a month ago. So you're dealing with kind of a powder keg here. That's been the case all the time this season. But there are some underpinnings here too that kind of led to what happened tonight. Rutgers going 11 to 21 from three. Montez Mathis going 5 of 5. That's the difference in the game, is Rutgers making 11 threes on you in 21 tries. There are some underpinnings here, though, that have kind of led to Purdue being especially vulnerable to things like what happened tonight. Purdue years ago, made a real emphasis on offensive skill, obviously, and it's paid off profoundly. But it also brought some guys who, maybe weren't the best athletes, who are a little bit of a departure from what you had back in the day in terms of the Etwan Moores, the Keaton Grants, the Chris Kramers, the athletic, long types of athletes. The rules have changed over the years to where you can't just grab people's jerseys anymore. You can't just barrel through a ball screen the way Chris Kramer used to do. But Purdue has brought in some really good offensive players who had some real defensive limitations when they got to Purdue. And that's not going to change anytime soon, because Purdue's going to want shooters, really good shooters. And when you have really good shooters who are also really athletic and really aggressive and really good on D, they're hard to get. And oftentimes they're not in college very long. So Purdue has kind of changed its philosophy a little bit defensively, following the analytics to protect the lane at all costs, to try to contain the dribble, to try to keep the ball out of the post, to try to keep the ball out of the paint in general. When you're doing that, and when you guys watch the games, you see this. So, I mean, I'm only explaining this now because I don't think I really have ever. What Purdue does is it really leaves some space off of shooters sometimes, because when one guy gets beat off the dribble, the other one has to come over and close that off. It's not really, pack line defense, but conceptually it's a little bit cut from the same cloth. It's not a pack line defense, but there's some philosophical similarities there. But what it does is, when you have that defender away from the ball, you're asking him to cover a lot of ground to close out on somebody, because he's waiting to help somebody and giving a little bit of ground because he's leaning toward the lane, if that makes any sense. And you're asking guys, to really accelerate and really get out there quickly. You're asking them to anticipate and be ahead of plays and not behind plays. And sometimes that's going to beat you. And when it beats you early in the game, sometimes it can take a good shooting team and make them a really good shooting team, or a bad shooting team and make them a good shooting team. Because, as Matt Painter will tell you, when a team gets in a rhythm, gets their head up, so to speak, things can kind of take off from there. I thought it kind of cost Purdue the game at Texas 2 years ago, where they were, Texas was a bad shooting team, but Purdue gave them a little bit of space early. Matt Coleman made some shots. A couple other guys made some shots. Suddenly their head's up. Suddenly it snowballs on you. Well, perhaps Montez Mathis, whoever it is tonight, got a little bit too much space early on, saw one go down, then the next one goes down. All of a sudden they're rolling. And all of a sudden maybe that's kind of infectious. You've seen what happened with Purdue and Mackey Arena sometimes, where if one guy's making shots, a bunch of guys seem to be making shots. But I think systematically Purdue's philosophy can kind of lend itself to allowing that to happen. But what are you going to do? I mean, if you have real concerns off the dribble, that it stands to reason to prioritize that. You just have to do the best you can with it and hope that the guys that you're willing to help off of, playing the percentages, Montez Mathis, again, a 29% shooter coming in, don't kill you. And tonight they just killed you. Rutgers, again, 11 to 21 from three. That's the difference in the game. Purdue, again, is a really limited defensive team. They got to find answers real quick. I don't know where those answers are going to come from, but if Purdue doesn't get better defensively, winning games like this, I mean, against a ranked team on the road. Saying a ranked team in the Big Ten is almost redundant, because more than half the league is ranked. Michigan State won't be next week. It'll be crazy when half the league is ranked next week, but Michigan State, Purdue, and Indiana aren't among them. But anyway, Purdue's got to find some answers real quick defensively. They just got to do the best they can with it. Again, they're limited. They're inexperienced. It's a real quagmire. You just have to do the best you can with it. They have to get better from a defensive perspective. They have to get better communicating, helping one another, but also by gaining experience. Another problem Purdue had tonight was simply the fact that Purdue, this wasn't Eric Hunter's night. He didn't play well. Brandon Newman didn't have a particularly good game either, and those are your starting guards. Those are a big part of what you do offensively. And to get going offensively, Painter had to use Isaiah Thompson and Jaden Ivey, who at this stage of their careers, and both of them can get better. I'd be surprised if both of them don't get better. It's not exactly not exactly your ideal tandem defensively. Both those guys will get better, but there are realities at play here too in terms of when you're big. Containing the dribble is a little bit of an issue. It's always going to be a trade-off. When you have Travion Williams and Zach Edey out there, that's going to be an advantage offensively and on the glass, but defensively, those guys, are never going to be able to move their feet in a way where they can ideally cover a high ball screen. And Geo Baker got Purdue on that high ball screen a couple times, and that's just the reality of Purdue's situation. But they just have to do the best they can with it, get better every week if they can, and just, I can't say anything more than just do the best you can with it. Moving on from defense, that was 10 minutes of me breaking down Purdue's, struggling defense. I think this was the best of Travion Williams, and I think that's a really positive sign. Now the question becomes sustaining it. I personally think Miles Johnson is really good. I think he's a guy who can play on my Big Ten team any day. I think he's an NBA type of player. I think he's at the defensive end, I should say. I don't know if he's an NBA offensive guy yet, but I think he's an NBA type rim protector and physical presence. Travion Williams was 10 of 12 from the floor, had 21 points, 12 rebounds, just played really well. And when he plays this well, Purdue's going to be a tough out, even if they struggle defensively. That was a really positive sign from tonight. Isaiah Thompson, if this can get him going, the 17 points he scored. He's had a really up and down season. He had a really up and down off season, I think, and it bled into this season. But if this can get him going a little bit, that would certainly be helpful. Eric Hunter will play better than he did tonight. Brandon Newman will play better than he did tonight. Jaden Ivey is better when he's attacking off the dribble. I think sometimes maybe he's a little bit too confident in his three-pointer, whereas he's so good off the dribble. That is probably worth exploring to the nth degree, because I think that's where he can really help Purdue more than anything, because when you have people who can go past people, finish at the basket, it really completes you offensively. He's going to get better and better, I think. But you didn't necessarily get the guard play to start the game. You needed from the guys who are a little bit better defensively, and I don't think that's a sign of an enduring problem, but it's part of this team's inconsistency. I think you sort of expect a little bit of inconsistency from Brandon Newman, being a little bit inexperienced, a lot inexperienced. But it was disappointing to see Eric Hunter play the way he played. He will be better. He's a better player than he showed tonight, obviously. But he struggled at Iowa. He struggled tonight, and Purdue needs a little bit more of a steadiness from him, because he's their leader, he's their energy guy, and he's their best guard. And that's going to be really important for them moving forward. But Purdue, even with all the stuff I've been diagnosing here, they were up 5 with 11 minutes to go. They had a chance to extend that, didn't get it done. The turnover for the pick six I thought was a big play. After they're up 5, they give up a 3. I think Paul Mulcahy, then a turnover for a dunk, and that kind of swung the game back to Rutgers. Again, 8 turnovers is what you need on the road, and it's not always the volume, it's the impact. And I thought that was an impactful turnover and whatnot. But what this boiled down to was Rutgers making 11 threes, Purdue struggling defensively, and that's pretty much it. So I have talked way too long here. I apologize for my long-windedness. I will leave it at that. From Purdue's 81-76 loss at Rutgers, I'm obviously not at Rutgers, but again, if you look real close, you can see Yankee Stadium from here. This is Brian Neubert from goldenblack.com. Please keep in mind the Purdue Union Club Hotel. Next time you're planning a trip to campus, please keep them in mind. PurdueUnionClubHotel.com. Thank you for watching. Thank you for reading. Thank you for listening. And thank you for processing our materials, however it is you process our materials. I will talk to you again Saturday, probably from Illinois. That'll be exciting, a road game. Take care, everybody.